Hi, folks. We spent quite a bit of time this week examining the figure of William Tecumseh Sherman, who's the commander of the famous March to the Sea, which helps to destroy the Southern economy during the Civil War. Um, in a lot of Southern accounts, especially as the 19th century marches forward, Sherman really emerges as this diabolical figure. He's really almost a Satan figure in Southern memory. Um, uh, but initially, after the Civil War, Sherman actually isn't seen that way. Of course, Sherman is infamous for advocating total war, meaning the destruction of railroads, barns, livestock, private property, basically to destroy the enemy economy, to shorten the war. Sherman famously said that war is hell, and he said there was no point in trying to rehabilitate it or reform it. That war by nature is terrible, and that the best thing to do was to get it over quickly. And General Sherman makes the argument that it's better to destroy property than to kill people. And so I think you can make a sound argument along those lines. Sherman's not the only person to receive that kind of treatment in the Southern lost cause mythology. You also have General Benjamin Butler of Massachusetts, who's the military occupier of New Orleans during the Civil War. And Ben Butler was loathed by Southerners, supposedly, according to myth. He personally profited by looting silverware and other valuables from rich Southerners. So he's kind of a devil figure. Also, you have, along the same kind of lines, General David Hunter, a cavalry officer from New York. David Hunter is in command of Union forces in the Shenandoah Valley late in the Civil War. And he implements a scorched earth policy there. So beautiful farms and with all their livestock and crops and everything are basically destroyed, put to the torch to deny the Army of Northern Virginia from access to those supplies. So there are multiple people during the Civil War that are remembered for their destructiveness. In the case of William Tecumseh Sherman, I would argue that there are grounds to dislike him as a historical figure, but it's probably not his march to the sea. There have been many 20th and 21st century military officers and strategists who actually see merit in total war. They would argue that a short war is the most humane type of war. Instead, I would argue that Sherman, you can dislike him for his post-war record. After the Civil War, actually, for the first probably couple of decades or so, William Tecumseh Sherman is not a hated figure in the South in the eyes of most people. He had worked before the Civil War as the superintendent of a military academy in Louisiana. And Sherman, when the war broke out, there's an account of him saying goodbye to his students and the other faculty and members of the community who he'd gotten to know. And Sherman is overcome with emotion. He's really unable to speak, and people are expecting him to give a goodbye address. All he can do is basically put his hand over his heart. And Sherman looks at the assembled audience and he said, "All of you are in here," meaning in my heart. And that was all that he could say. During the war, when some of those Louisiana cadets become prisoners of the Union Army, Sherman found out about it, and he made sure that those men were properly taken care of, that they had coats and blankets, that they were well treated. He went out of his way to do that. After the Civil War, it's clear that Sherman does not dislike the South and its people, that he wants the South to be rebuilt and restored. And he visits Atlanta. There were jokes that were made about Sherman burning the town down, but it's pretty clear that this was not a hostile visitation, that the people of Atlanta saw him as an officer who'd done his job, but someone who cared about them. The reason I think you could dislike Sherman is that one of the bases for Southern sympathies toward him is that it becomes clear from his public statements that Sherman is a white supremacist. He's a racist who does not believe that African Americans should have civil rights. So that's not to say that he's unusual. There were many Northerners in the 19th century that would have said the same things. What's even worse, though, in some ways, is Sherman's record during the Indian Wars. He's promoted to lieutenant general and is largely in charge of hostilities against Native Americans in the West, following, I think it's the Fetterman Massacre on the part of the Sioux and Cheyenne. Sherman actually advocates genocide at one point. He suggested that men, women, and children might be simply wiped out to get rid of the Indian problem. Infamously, he uses the expression, nits make lice. Nits are the little eggs that hatch into lice. So Sherman is using rhetoric to refer to Native people that's every bit as bad as anything that the Nazis ever said. He's saying that they are like vermin, and that when you say nits make lice, he's advocating, in effect, killing the young to prevent them from growing up into adults. So this is horrific language. And so I think there's good cause to not like William Tecumseh Sherman as a historical figure, but it's probably not his Civil War service. It's what comes afterwards. We've had an interesting week so far. The term is burning by very rapidly, but that always happens. Have a great weekend, and I'll get back to you folks later.